Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the System2 podcast. Today, I have Jen Pelka, who started Une Femme Wines, here to tell us about her entrepreneurship journey and about the company that she's built. But before we get to that, Jen, tell us who you are. What's your story?
Well, thanks so much for having me. Great to see you and always fun to connect. Yeah, a bit about me. So I live in Sonoma. I've spent my life either mostly in California or in New York City. I grew up in Florida and then moved out to Stanford as an undergrad and studied history of science, philosophy of science, totally unrelated to anything I do now. But I really have always loved restaurants and cooking and food and entertaining for my whole life. That's been a really central focus. I grew up in a family of amazing cooks. My dad was an incredible home cook and entertainer. And my mom's an amazing baker. And our house was always full of people getting together, enjoying a meal, toasting to something, and celebrating around the table. That's always been just a really, really big part of my life. And so when I graduated from college, I was trying to figure out what exactly I wanted to do. And I told my parents I want to take out a small business loan and move to San Francisco and open a restaurant. And they said, absolutely not. They said, use your education, go to New York, get a real job, go work in banking or go work in consulting. And, we didn't pay for this education for nothing. And so I got a job at a hedge fund. I worked at D.E. Shaw as my first job out of college. And I just kept feeling this pull back to restaurants and food and cooking, and was really lucky and met the sous chef of Restaurant Danielle, a New York Times 4-star restaurant and Michelin 3-star restaurant at the time in New York, and just met him at a bar. And I had heard that it was possible to go work as an intern, or what they would call a stage, in a kitchen. And I asked, hey, can I come work for you on the weekends? And he said, okay, give me a call next week. I called him and he picked up the phone and he said, all right, come in on Saturday, black pants, black shoes, white shirt, bring your knives. And I was like, knives? And I was 22 at the time. And, this was like before Top Chef. This was in 2004, 2005. It was, a kind of a different time in terms of what we knew about restaurants and chefs. And I walked into that kitchen that Saturday morning and just fell in love with fine dining and restaurant life. I didn't know any French. I didn't know any knife skills. I didn't have any kind of background in fine dining. I'd never really been to a fine dining restaurant before, but I just loved the experience and kind of begged to come back the following week. And so I ended up cooking at Danielle every Saturday for free for a year and a half. And eventually ended up leaving the hedge fund world to really work in food and wine and hospitality for the rest of my career. So 20 years later, I now have a wine company that I actually own with my brother. And he's also a former finance guy. And the two of us, we lead this company and we have a tremendous amount of fun. And, it's an unusual career path, I think, for both of us, but it's incredibly, incredibly enjoyable. And we get to weave together our hobbies and a lot of hard work.
That's amazing. How did you buy some knives? Like, talk to me about from the moment you met him at a bar to be like, all right, come on in. Then what happened? Did you like, how did you get that? I don't know, the confidence, all the things that you needed to go in and actually like perform. This isn't like your neighborhood Taco Bell, right? This is fine dining.
Not Taco Bell. Yeah, I had one knife. It was from Crate and Barrel, and I brought it wrapped in a hand towel, like a tea towel with a hair tie around it. That first day, I was peeling heirloom tomatoes. They put me on like the very back of one of the veg prep stations, and I didn't know what an heirloom tomato was at the time, and I certainly didn't know that you could peel them, but you can, in fact, score them and blanch them and then stick them in ice, and then you can peel them. And so they taught me that quick little technique, and I'm peeling the tomatoes. And the executive chef of the restaurant, the first thing he does every service is walks over and shakes hands with everyone. It's like a sign of respect. He came over, it's like 10:30 in the morning. He comes over, shakes in with me, and I knocked over the entire tray of peeled tomatoes onto his feet. And he just like backed away and was horrified. But I was incredibly lucky. Somebody called out sick on the canapé station, which, like, no one really calls out sick in those kinds of restaurants. You just, like, work through it. But somebody called out sick, and so it was the lowest position on the line. So they put me on the line during service, which is very, very unusual for somebody who's staging. But they just needed an extra set of hands. And so I learned really, like, quickly the basics as to how to plate something. And in the middle of service, it's one of those kitchens where it's kind of like a show kitchen. So a lot of guests will walk through the kitchen, and an older gentleman and this woman who was, like, incredibly tall and wearing fur and so glamorous, they walked in and looked under the pass at the canopy station right at me, and he goes, "God bless you, you geniuses." I was like, "I've gotta keep doing this. This is amazing." So I was hooked from there. So, I mean, the way that I was able to, like, keep up with it was I mean, I knew that I knew absolutely nothing and that I had no techniques, no exposure, and almost everybody in that kitchen at the time, they were all guys, and many of them were French and had been cooking since they were teenagers. But I just came back every single week. I always had a notebook with me. I was always taking notes, and when I was not there, I was practicing and learning as much as I possibly could, reading as many culinary textbooks as I possibly could, and just gaining as much information as possible. And I think that that's true for, any young person in their career. When they're that young and they're that hungry, you don't even know what you don't know. So you're just willing to put it all out there and keep going. And I try to maintain that level of enthusiasm and innocence in my work sometimes, but it's a lot harder now that I'm 42.
How Tell me more about that first meeting at the bar where you convinced the sous chef of Daniel to bring you on. I'm also interested. I've seen like one of the themes with entrepreneurs that there's some element of like fake it till you make it. I'm curious, like, did you go in like saying, "Oh, I have all these, like, I'm a great cook X, Y, Z," and then you show up there, it's like, "I didn't know you can peel tomatoes." Was there an element of that? Or how did you convince them to give you that shot?
I was certainly an enthusiastic home cook, but again, I was 22. So I was so, so, so young, living in New York for the first time, living in an apartment with some friends. But I had been learning a bit about, especially French cooking. And I was kind of a regular customer at Dean and DeLuca in Soho. And I remember the specific thing that convinced Brian, the sous chef, that I was worthy of working in the kitchen was that earlier that week, I had been talking to one of the butchers at Dean and DeLuca about how to make duck confit. And that person, like, brought me into the walk-in and gave me duck fat for free, like a huge amount of free duck fat, which seems insane, and ducks, and, like, taught me how to cure them. So I'd been curing these duck legs for like 2 weeks and then was planning on confiting them in my little Lower East Side apartment. And so I think I told him that, and he was like, "Oh, this girl, she must know something about what she's talking about." And I think because I walked in there with him, everybody else assumed I knew something or had been to culinary school. But the reality is like, it's just a ton of hard work, and they're teaching you every single dish anyway. Like, no one really knows how to do these things. In the kitchen, you really learn by doing. And so the fact that I didn't know the 5 mother sauces didn't really matter, because they asked me, "Do you know the 5 mother sauces?" I said, "No, I don't know them." And they said, "Well, next week when you come back, you better know what they are." So I just researched them and came back. And I think I totally agree with you. There's a huge component of fake it till you make it. Even now, so many years later in my career, anytime we're considering doing something new as entrepreneurs, a lot of it is just like closing your eyes and jumping in the pool. And you don't want to sink, so you figure out how to swim.
Yeah. What about, okay, take us back to your childhood. You said that your family would host a lot of people, and your dad would cook, your mom would bake. Bring us back to one of those events. Like, were these your parents' friends? Was it family? Like, who are these people that were coming there, and what did you learn from your parents about hosting?
Well, my dad's side of the family has always been in restaurants. So his parents owned diners and delis in New Jersey. And my dad grew up working in them. And for example, like over the winters, selling Christmas trees out of the back of the diners. And so on his side of the family, he came from a big family. He had 4 sisters and brothers, and they all had a bunch of kids, and everybody lived in New Jersey, so everyone was always at my grandparents' house, and there was always something on the stove. It was either, just like traditional spaghetti and meatballs, or the thing that we would make very often together was all summer long. They lived on a dock across, or they lived in New Jersey with a dock across the street, and so we would all go crabbing and then bring back dozens of crabs and then put newspapers out on the table, and then there'd be a pot of water boiling. We'd throw the crabs in. There would be like a huge pan full of butter and garlic, and then you're just like sauteing them, and then everybody's like throwing them out on the table and just going to town. So that was like such an incredible memory. And then my grandfather at the time was the chef of the Ocean County, New Jersey jail. And he worked there for over 20 years, and he would bring home the 2 things that would go bad: bananas and cream puffs. So he would make these inmates cream puffs like all the time, which I think is so sweet. And he would come home in his whites. So I was really used to seeing him in his whites with his side towels stamped with OC jail. And so that was very formative. That was just like all of our social activity at the house really revolved around eating, drinking, having parties, like big dinner parties, essentially all week and all weekend long. And then at my house growing up, we would have big dinner parties with all of my parents' friends, and would get together with like, a dozen parents. And my dad and my mom would be cooking for like 2 days in anticipation of everybody, and then throw together a big dinner. And those were some of our just happiest memories as a family. And I started cooking dinner parties for my friends in high school. And we would drink Martinelli sparkling cider. And the first big dinner party I made was a roast pork chop with apples, and then a garlic mashed potato, and then my grandma Minnie's chocolate cake. So I just remember it so distinctly as these things that we would put a lot of love into the preparation for, and then bring everybody together. And that's there's just always so much joy around the table for those kinds of days. And still to this day, I mean, we anchor almost all of our social activity, my husband and I, around having dinner parties at our house, whether it's for just another couple or a big group of people for a 4th of July barbecue or Labor Day weekend or Thanksgiving or Christmas. It's just like a constant for us.
At what point did you become interested in wine or the pairings with the meals? Was that something you also had, an interest in early on, or developed it later?
I really started getting into wine when I was in my early 20s in New York, and there was a restaurant, Schiller's, which is no longer, but it was a neighborhood corner bar in the Lower East Side, owned by the same guy who started Balthazar and Pastis. And that was actually the bar that I met Brian, the chef of Danielle, at. And we were just regulars at this bar. We would walk in, and they would like move people off of our bar seats, and they would plunk down a bottle of Prosecco, and they would give us free Prosecco, like bottles at a time. And we would tip like $50. And we'd get some food, but it wasn't really about that. It was more about just the feeling of drinking sparkling wine in a flute and being treated really like a VIP at a restaurant. And so I fell in love with sparkling wine there. And then once I was working at Danielle, got a tremendous amount of exposure to more fine wines, and especially champagnes, Burgundy, Alsatian wines, those kinds of special wines. And then after I worked at Danielle, I went to the Gilt Group, the shopping site, and I was the managing editor of their culinary side of the business. So it was called Gilt Taste, and we sold fine wines and gourmet food. And that's where I really, really started learning about great wines, because we started doing sales with, for example, Veuve Clicquot and Dom Perignon and Krug, and then like really special wines from smaller regions throughout the world. But I remember going to the Veuve Clicquot headquarters and learning all about the history of Veuve Clicquot. Veuve means widow, and the woman who took over the Clicquot house was a young widow who really changed the course of history of wine. And I learned all about it. And there's a step in the winemaking process called riddling, or remuage is the French term. And it's a step that the widow Clicquot invented, where previously sparkling wines had been a cloudy beverage because the fermentation happens in the bottle. And so she was like, nobody wanted to buy champagnes because they would explode. And also they were cloudy and murky. And so she was like, there's got to be a way to refine this a bit. And so she took a door off of its hinges and laid it flat and then drilled holes in it and took the bottles and put them neck down into these racks, which are now called riddling racks. And then she would turn them each day and the sediment would go into the neck of the bottle. And then she figured out a way to remove the sediment. So that's called riddling. And that's how you get crystal clear champagne. So she invented that. She totally changed the course of wine history because of it. And I remember learning about this at the Veuve Clicquot headquarters. And I said to my friend, one day I'm going to open a champagne bar called The Riddler. Like 10 years later, I did it. And I opened 2 locations of The Riddler, one in San Francisco and one in New York in the West Village. The first San Francisco in 2017, the New York location in 2019. And our focus was entirely on champagne. So we served hundreds of champagnes by the bottle. And the other thing that was really cool was that all of our investors were women. So really getting back to that history of the traditions that the Widow Clicquot introduced into the champagne tradition of women supporting women. And so we had 33 investors in San Francisco and 40 in New York, all of whom were women. And we had a killer champagne list. And they were both very, very fun places. So that's where the champagne obsession really came to its head, I would say.
That's fascinating. I never thought about the look of wine or champagne and how important that is from a branding perspective. I'm curious, like, yeah, like just even how the Widow Clicquot like came up with that, right? I mean, it sounds like in retrospect, it's like, yeah, nobody likes to drink dirty water, and so if you're making it clear, it's like, it's a no-brainer, and now everyone has copied that style. But at the time, it must have been such a novel idea.
Absolutely. Completely. I mean, innovation comes from all kinds of places and so often out of necessity, out of a business need or a customer request, basically. And you make do with what you have available. And in the Widow Clicquot's case, it was a door that she took off its hinges. But then I think all of us as entrepreneurs are always thinking about things like that.
Tell me more about the Riddler and what it was like. So up until then, you worked at other places, you worked for other people, and was that the first time you did something entrepreneurially on your own?
I have always been very entrepreneurial. I started a lot of side hustles that never really turned into big businesses. But my first big business prior to the Riddler was a services business in San Francisco. I moved out to San Francisco after I met my husband. And he and I dated long distance between San Francisco and New York. And then he's an entrepreneur as well. He's a restaurateur. He has 6 Greek restaurants in San Francisco called Suvla. And very popular, really fun places. But when he got the lease for his first place, I moved out to San Francisco, and I was actually working at Open Table at the time, heading up restaurant marketing. So B2B marketing, specifically focused on the top tier of restaurateurs. And I saw a huge need in San Francisco with all of our friends who were also restaurant owners for PR in the city of San Francisco. I was coming from New York. I had 10 or 15 years of a network that was built up of New York-based national media who were specifically interested in restaurant news. And I started just doing PR for my husband's restaurant opening, and I knew all thshothese people. And then a lot of people would ask him, hey, who's doing your PR? You're getting so much press. Can I get some of that as well? And he was like, you should quit Open Table and start a PR business. So I did it like just kind of on a whim and really because a few friends needed help. And so I started with really great restaurant owners like Brandon Jew from Mr. Jews and Evan and Sarah Rich from Rich Table and people like that who were truly just like in our network of friends. And I decided that I wanted to create the best restaurant PR agency in San Francisco. So really laser focused on being in the restaurant PR space and specifically the San Francisco chef community. And I was really selective about which clients we would bring on and really laser focused on restaurants specifically in the San Francisco Bay Area and all the really good ones. And so that helped to build my reputation in both ways. It was a great way for me to get new clients into the Magnum PR business, but then also anytime we would reach out to an editor in New York, they would know that these restaurants were cool because we only worked with the best. And so that's a piece of specificity, I would say, in strategy that I've taken with me with all of my businesses and was also something that I would always tell my clients is You always want to try to figure out what can you be the first, the best, or the only at, and get as specific as possible. So for us at Une Femme, we are working to become the best canned wine company in the United States. We've pivoted and evolved our business and our strategy many, many times, but that's what we're laser focused on now. And I believe that that will be our long-term strategy. And I think it's incredibly clarifying for your team when you can say really concretely, we are or we are working towards the goal of we want to be the first, the best, or the only at something. And it can be the first, best, or only in your city or on your block, or it can be in the world or in history. And
Which
it's
one are you
pretty
going for?
motivating too, to know what you're working towards or what you've already accomplished.
Are you, yeah, do you want to be like the first best only on the block or in history? Like where on that spectrum do you tend to gravitate?
The world/history is what I always go towards. But that being said, with the Riddler, we wanted to be the best champagne bars in San Francisco and New York. But our goal with the Riddlers over time was to be the best champagne bars in the world, and we wanted to have many of them all around the globe. We ended up closing the Riddlers because of COVID, and I think it was the right business decision. It was a gut-wrenching, really, really hard decision at the time, and still even 5 years later, I still miss the Riddler every day. But sometimes you have to make those decisions as a business owner. And but I've always had pretty big ambitions, I would say.
So yeah, tell me about that transition. So you closed the Riddler because of COVID. How did you then move on to Unfem?
So we launched Une Femme at the Riddler as a side hustle, just like it was really our house wine. And the reason why we launched it was, again, in response to a customer request, or a lot of customer requests. So we, at the Riddler, as I mentioned, all of our investors were women. And as you can imagine, a lot of our social media and our press coverage was sort of all about that. And so when you would walk into the Riddler, the dining room would be like 80% women. And I'm talking women in their early 20s all the way to their 80s and 90s who were getting together to like celebrate something special, a promotion, a wedding, a divorce, Tuesday night, like whatever it was, but they were getting together in this space that felt very pro-woman, but in a way that was really sexy and cool and fun. And we had a huge champagne list that was hundreds of champagnes by the bottle. And for a lot of customers, we would give them that book and they would say, I don't even know where to start. You pick. Like, I don't know. I'm sure this is all good, right? This is champagne. It's got to be good. And so we started doing menu features to help people to understand their way around the list. And we would do things like Blanc de Blanc champagnes or champagnes from Ambonnet. And nothing was like really working. People didn't really understand, or frankly didn't really care that much about the specifics. And so we started featuring wines made by women winemakers, and they would outsell everything else. And I was like, there is something here. And people started asking us, how do I know if a wine is made by a woman if I'm in a retail shop or a restaurant? I was like, well, we should create a brand for this. There's not a brand that focuses on this. And so we launched really in partnership in the beginning with some of our favorite winemakers who were women whose wines we already had on the list at the Riddler. The first was this amazing woman, Julie Medvey, who's a fifth-generation winemaker in Champagne. She would come to the Riddler all the time. We served her bottles by the glass all the time, and we spent a lot of time with her in Champagne. And so did this co-branded collaborative wine with her to launch. And the wines were only available at the Riddler in San Francisco and New York, but then some of our friends started asking us to make them available to them at their restaurants, their shops. So we sold them at a handful of really great places in San Francisco, New York, and Chicago. And then we started noticing that the top selling wines were always whatever was a sparkling rosé by the glass that was the most affordable. Like every single day, the most wine we sold was sparkling rosé. So it's like, we've got to do a sparkling rosé. So we reached out to one of our favorite California winemakers, Samantha Sheehan, who makes Ultraviolet and Poe, and now she makes Mom and Pop, these really cool vermouths. And I was like, can we do a sparkling rosé that's dry and that's at the right price? And she's like, yeah. So we did that one also in collaboration. And so we had these wines. They were being sold at the Riddlers. They were being sold at a handful of restaurants. And then we closed the Riddler. So at that point, Zach, my brother, had joined the company. He was leading finance for the Riddlers. And we had plans, as I said, to open in many locations around the world. But we still had the IP for Une Femme in a separate company. We did not wind that company down. We had those assets. It was a small business at the time, but we realized, it took almost a full year to get through the process of closing the Riddler. It takes a really long time to wind a business down. Sort of midway through all of this, we were like, okay, what are we going to do with Une Femme? So we, started selling it in more places, but it was still a very small boutique business. It wasn't really like a commercially viable business, at least not for us to bring other team members onto the team. Maybe it could have been a lifestyle business, but we had investors. And so we're like, okay, let's see if we can grow this into something that's scalable. And we were incredibly lucky, and this was truly just luck, that we met the team from Delta Airlines in 2021. So we closed the bars in 2020. And then in 2021, we met the team from Delta because they had actually been in town meeting with the Suvla team, my husband's restaurant team, to talk to them about getting Suvla onto Delta One, the premium first class cabins for Delta coming out of COVID. And so Suvla was selected as the restaurant partner, which is amazing. And I was involved in a little bit of the wining and dining of the Delta team. And my husband said, why don't you show them Une Femme? And I was like, oh yeah, why don't I show them Une Femme? And so at one of the tastings, I set up a little table and they came by, and one of the buyers picked up one of our mini bottles of rosé and said, huh, why don't we do this in October? And it was July at the time. And the other buyer was like, yeah, October next year. And he's like, no, let's do it this year. So in a matter of 2 to 3 months, we had to figure out how to produce enough wine to be on every plane for 1 month. And it was 5 times as much wine as we had made previously. And, it's the supply chain problem at the end of the day. It's supply chain, it's distribution. Of course, it's winemaking, but it's all of these sort of less sexy pieces of the business to figure out how to get this product to them. So we figured it out. Thank God for Zach, because Zach is like an operations wizard, and he figured out how to do it. And we were featured on all of the Delta planes for 1 month for October for their breast cancer awareness month. And they have stayed on as a partner with us for many, many years. We love working with them, and we've expanded with them significantly. So they were actually the first people who came to us and said, would you ever consider doing a wine in a can? Which I had, as a fine dining person who had owned champagne bars, did not previously have a tremendous amount of interest in canned wines. But of course, they were such an amazing partner and customer that I said, yeah, of course, we'd love to figure it out. And so we worked really hard to create really good wines specifically for cans. And
What does that entail? Like, how does the container impact? I don't know. It obviously impacts the appearance. Does it impact the taste? What goes into that process?
Yeah, canning wines is kind of its own ball of wax. It's totally different than putting wines into bottle. You really have to pay attention to the chemical makeup of your wine, specifically the acidity levels. So high acid wines have the ability to corrode the interior lining of an aluminum can, which then can lead to the aluminum having an impact on the flavor or the lifespan of a wine. Wines in can in general have a very short lifespan. So one thing you always want to look for if you're buying a canned wine is see if there's a best by date or a made by date. And you want to make sure you're buying wines that are as fresh as possible. Definitely no older than a year. And ideally, you want something that's much fresher. 2 to 6 months, let's say, would be ideal. And so we now can our wines every single month. We have a huge focus on freshness. And we actually, in partnership with a bunch of our competitors, are leading what's called the Canned Wine Consortium, which is, I think there are 15 of the leading canned wine makers. We're working in partnership with Cornell University and sending all of our wines for chemical analysis. And they're doing all this crazy stuff like freezing the wines, putting the wines in really hot areas, putting the wines in the sun, like shaking the wines a lot, all this kind of stuff to see how wine reacts to cans and the different kinds of liners, and then also the different makeup of the varietals, and if there's oak or if there's stainless steel fermentation, if there's SO2, if there's not, if there's coloring added, any of those kinds of things. And so we as a group really want to improve the quality of wines in can on shelves overall. And I think we all believe the rising tide lifts all boats. And so, we're so excited to be a part of this. So the first set of analysis is coming actually in July when we have a big panel of people both on the East Coast and the West Coast, to taste through these wines that they have done all this crazy stuff to. And our goal with the consortium is at the end of some of these studies to publish some scientific papers for the industry to say, hey, keep your acidity level between X and Y. Don't put oaked wines into cans, and here's why. Like, your pH levels need to be here. And it's very, very different from bottles. But I think that the comfort with cans is increasing. It is the one category of wine that right now is growing. You may have heard that the wine industry is in a bit of a funk at the moment, and that specifically is with bottled wines that are fine wines and luxury wines. But the one category that's growing is canned wines. And I think it's because the quality is increasing, and also young customers are really accustomed to drinking alcohol in cans in a way that no other generation has been, because they got introduced to alcohol with seltzers in cans. And now those kids are looking to, I shouldn't say kids, those young adults are looking to drink better and more interesting things in cans when they don't only want to drink seltzers. And there's still like a dearth of options. There are about 15 good at scale wine brands in can versus thousands or tens of thousands in bottle. And so for us, we're already the third largest canned wine company in the United States. Our goal is to be number one, of course, but we've only been at it for 3 years, and the two competitors that are larger than us have been at it for almost 20 years. So our goal is to continue to introduce the best and freshest canned wines out there, and for our wines specifically to be made to be high quality in can and as fresh as possible.
Yeah, what was the goal? Like, what was Delta's goal behind wanting to invest more in cans? Like, why is the can format popular?
So for Delta specifically, they are really sustainability focused. And so glass bottles are not recyclable in all 50 states, whereas aluminum is. So that is number one. And number two, it reduces the weight on board. It's a lot lighter to put a canned wine on board than a bottled wine. And then the third, it's very easy and fast for service to open. And I would say, Delta is a very important customer of ours. All of the areas where we're seeing growth are in areas where those things matter to those customers as well. So we have a huge business in what I would call travel and entertainment. So cruise lines, hotels, rooftop bars, basically places where people don't want glass to be served. They also need speed of service. They need the ability to pop a can really quickly. If you think about how long it takes to open a bottle of champagne versus crack a can of wine, I mean, as somebody who ran champagne bars for years, it is hard to teach people how to successfully and elegantly open a bottle of champagne versus cracking a can takes 2 seconds and requires literally no education. And we also are seeing a huge business in arenas and stadiums. So places where people want something that's single serve, that's fresh, that is light, that is chilled and refreshing, almost like a beer, but an alternative to a beer, or a seltzer and an alternative to a seltzer. And so we're finding that we're really focusing all of our sales efforts, and our go-to-market strategy is around identifying places where people are out and about and having fun, where they're making memories, where they're having a great time, where they want a good quality wine option, where previously it had been like crappy wines in screw top that were being poured into plastic glasses. Like, we know that our wines are better than an inexpensive like bulk wine option that's going to get poured into a plastic glass. They're better. I mean, we hold ourselves to a higher standard than that, but for sure we're better than that. And so, I don't know that I come from, as I said, the fine dining world. I grew up really in the world of sommeliers who are focusing so much on the experience of opening and potentially decanting a bottle of wine, pouring it into the right glassware, swirling, sniffing, like the whole aromatic experience. And like, there's absolutely a time and place for that. Like, that's how I drink my wines 5 days a week, but 2 days a week when I'm like in the pool or out on a walk with my dog, if I'm having a glass of wine, like drinking out of a can, it's better than any other portable experience you can have.
So tell me more about the business side of Une Femme. Like, is it mostly like B2B where you're striking up partnerships with venues, airline, cruise ships, or is there a direct to consumer piece as well?
We do have a direct consumer piece to our business for sure. We want people to be able to shop us everywhere around the country, and it takes a long time to get true retail penetration. So our direct consumer side of the business is an important solution where we haven't yet gotten into retailers in local areas. So you can always shop on our website, and we try to make that a great experience for our customers. We, of course, care about retail. And we have great partners in retail, for example, Total Wine and Sprouts. And we're in some Targets and things like that. But we love independent retailers. It just takes so long to get to every single independent retailer across the country. So our primary business model, again, it's evolved and we've learned a lot over the last 5 years. But our strategy is really focused on large scale, I would say almost like enterprise style opportunities, almost like B2B style sales, almost like a SaaS model. And what's interesting is in the wine space, a lot of the big buyers, so big hotel groups, cruise lines, airlines, train transportation, all of these places where they have huge coverage, they typically work on an RFP system. And so once a year, once every 2 years, once every 3 years, they'll put out a wide scale RFP, and we'll compete for those against others. But honestly, almost all of our really great partners are people we've met in the industry somehow at a conference, at a dinner, at something in Sonoma. And, much like so many businesses, even if we are doing large scale enterprise sales, it's such a relationship game. It's about building a long-term, and I think for us, we care very much about once we've landed a customer, like land and expand is always what we're talking about. Like, how do we find a way to get a toe dip into a really important property and then expand within them by showing up very consistently as a great partner, never having a stock out, keeping our pricing consistent, like making sure that we have a stable supply chain, even amid tariffs or crazy things like, when all of the boats were stuck in the Panama Canal. Like these sides of the wine business are not the sexiest pieces of them, but they are frankly like some of the most important components to showing up as a good partner.
And how, I'm curious, what kind of innovation is there in terms of packaging, or even I guess more broadly on the wine itself? We already talked about this partnership with Cornell, where you're looking to see the chemical nature of it. But I'm just thinking, you mentioned the aromatic, the smell side of wine, and I don't know, could there be some sort of can like packaging that has, I don't know, wider openings so you can get more of the smell out there? Like, are people trying to innovate in that piece of it?
Yeah, and definitely you can still smell the wines in a can, but it is not as significant as when you pour them into a glass and aerate them. We haven't talked specifically about like creating a larger opening. That's a pretty fun idea. I think for us, the innovation comes down to what we're seeing in terms of what people are asking us for all the time. And they're pretty simple things. Like the two things that we keep hearing that we will probably do. One is everybody wants a still rosé. That's like the number one thing that people are asking us for right now. Like that's what you want to drink in a can, especially when you're at a pool or on a beach. And the second is we're hearing a huge amount of requests for non-alc. The only reason why we haven't gotten into non-alc yet is it's so hard to make a good quality de-alked wine. And the thing that's interesting about non-alc wine, it is de-alked. So you make a wine and then you use a number of different methods to remove the alcohol. And so you're adding an additional step, so that costs money. And then the second thing is you're removing 30% of the volume. So you have to add back. So really, truly, non-alcoholic wines are much more expensive to make than wine. And customers right now are not particularly interested in paying for those two extra steps, which I completely understand. It seems like this doesn't have alcohol. What would I be paying for? So I think we could get over that hurdle and we could figure out pricing. But for us, we only want to do it if we're super, super proud of the product. Our winemaker has made de-alked wines in the past that are really good, but we're still trying to figure out exactly what we would be trying to say if we're going to do it. But there's not a single event I've gone to lately where 10% of customers are saying, hey, where's your non-alc? Like, you're going to tell me I have to drink water? I don't think so. I'd like to drink some wine. So I think we'll probably do it at some point.
Interesting. Yeah, in terms of wider trends in the industry, like you mentioned, yeah, like the bottled wine sales are, I mean, there's like obviously a lot of uncertainty in general. You mentioned tariffs. There's a lot that can impact any business, and obviously including like a wine business. How do you guys think about that? And even relative to the experience you had with the Riddler and COVID, where you had an event like that that really sort of, yeah, adversely impacted the business. How do you think about creating Une Femme to be more resilient and to be able to sustain these kinds of challenges and these kinds of changes in consumer tastes or preferences, and how to continue to be successful there?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the two most important factors for us as a team are um, access to capital and the ability to be flexible. Being young and nimble as a company, I think, is a huge benefit for us. We're a team of 10 people. We do a lot of work with our partners who are essentially like contract partners. But in terms of full time employees, we're a team of 10. Everybody who is on the team is very nimble and very solutions oriented, I would say. Many wine companies have been doing this for 100 years, 200 years, 500 years. So the benefit that they have is longevity and a very long view and the ability to weather a storm with sort of grace and poise and a very long term mindset. I think the benefits that we have as such a young company is the ability to like change course when we want to and when we need to, or when a customer asks for something that might take another company 10 years to get through their innovation pipeline. We just have a meeting with a couple people and say, do we want to do this? Okay, let's figure it out. And we'll do like a 5-day sprint and execute on it. We're right now working on introducing much more rigorous AI practices into our business, which is something that's very, very important to us. And we're specifically building an AI driven sales leads stack. It's something we've experimented with and we've done in a sort of one off basis amongst a number of team members, but we're doing a full team project on it right now and a 12-week program where we're kind of everybody's still doing their regular work, but we're going to figure this out by the end of the 12 weeks of like how to make this, how to make the funnel a lot bigger for our sales team, basically. I don't think we'll ever outsource all of our sales to AI, but I do think having as big of a funnel and stacking all of our sales team with as many meetings as we possibly can, like that's often the roadblock for smaller companies to grow.
And it's say more about that in particular. Like, so this is, again, you're targeting larger enterprises. What's the challenge? Just figuring out the right point person, if you want to go after other, I don't know, airlines or cruise ships, or what is the part that you're automating with AI?
It's identifying the leads, tracking down their contacts, and then getting great emails out to them to book meetings. Those are the steps that right now we as a team do individually, reaching out over various platforms, but it is so time intensive. It's just that research phase takes a really, really long time. Not only really like thinking of the ideas of, ooh, what could new lead categories be, but when you identify, okay, we want to be at all of the movie theaters that sell wine. Okay, researching what are all the movie theaters on the national level and at the regional level where we have salespeople, and then tracking down the contact information and then sending out those personalized emails, having personalized decks, and getting somebody on the phone. Once we get somebody on the phone, we have an incredibly high success rate, but the step of getting somebody on the phone or for an in-person meeting is what takes a long time. So I think that's just a really concrete, specific example of how AI is going to be hugely helpful to all of us in the business.
Maybe one topic to end the conversation on is, you mentioned you wanted to be number one in history, and there are, right, like the point that you made earlier is that a lot of these wine companies have been around for many generations. So it's not like you're talking about tech, and it sounds very crazy to be like, I'm the next whatever a social media platform, and I'm going to be here in 100 years. But when it comes to like alcohol, like these businesses have been around for thousands of years in some cases. Yeah, how do you think about that, about like that large goal in an industry where it's possible? It's not a crazy goal at all to become that. But to your point, like you don't have, the history and the resources that they do, but you are more nimble. So how are you going to get there?
Yeah, I think in the wine space, there's a real innovator's dilemma, especially with very traditional wine brands, wine companies that have these historic traditions and places that are they have like myths around them. Like if you go, especially in Europe, when you go to these incredible chateaus that have been through 7, 8, 10, 15 generations and they're still family owned, most of those kinds of wineries and brands don't have an interest in innovating in packaging. They want to retain what has made them so successful for generations, and they should. And I think what's distinct about us, frankly, what's different about American winemaking than winemaking anywhere in the world is like we aren't held by the same rules that there are in so many other areas. So, for example, I'll explain how it works in Champagne. So, in Champagne, the entire region has only 8 grapes that are allowed in Champagne. They can't put like whatever, they can't put Vermentino into Champagne. It's not allowed. You can't grow it there versus you totally could in California. You have to use the Champagne method, a very specific method for a very specific number of months. You have to grow your grapevines at a very specific height above the ground. It's regulated. There is a committee of people who test the pH of the soil and look at the weather. And they go out and they say to everyone in the entire Champagne region, this is the week you must harvest. And these are the dates by which you must be done harvesting. And everybody has to harvest at the same time in specific subregions. And then they bring the wines in, and the wines have to all be treated in the same ways. So that's why Champagne is always incredible. It's like pretty hard to find a bad bottle of Champagne because they hold everybody to this very high standard in the same way that you would with, let's say, Parmesan, because Parmesan must be made in very, very particular ways. In the United States, you can do whatever you want. You can grow whatever varietals you want in whatever kind of soil. I'm growing Assyrtiko in my backyard, Assyrtiko is a Greek varietal. And certainly my backyard does not have the traditional terroir of Santorini, but yeah, you can do whatever you want. You can put your wine into stainless steel. You can put it into oak barrels. You can put it into amphora. You can put it into concrete. You can bottle for 2 months on the lees or 8 years on the lees. Like you can do whatever you want in the United States, which is really cool. And that's also why packaging is interesting. So in Champagne, there is no chance that they will ever allow Champagne to be put in cans. It just won't be allowed. And even small bottles and splits are pretty frowned upon. So we've just got a lot of freedom to do those kinds of things. In the United States, a lot of the bigger winemakers did put wine in cans about 10 years ago, and then there were too many entrants into the market. People didn't understand the chemistry, and some of them flopped. And so I don't see a lot of the big brands being interested in creating their own brands, but I do believe that if there are brands like ours at Une Femme that really grow and capture a huge audience of customers, that we'll be able to team up with some of those bigger partners down the road, because we'll be too big to ignore, and we'll be number one. So
I
you know
love
how
it.
that goes.
Where can people drink some of your wine? Where's some good?
Well, the easiest thing is to go onto our website, which is unefemmewines.com, and go to the where to find section of the website. You can always order to your house, but then of course you can drink at a lot of incredible restaurants, hotels. You can buy at amazing wine shops all around the country. And if your favorite wine shop doesn't have our wines, feel free to ask them to bring them in, and they'll generally bring them in for you. Drop us an email, and we'll send you some wines to as a thank you as well.
Awesome. Well, Jen, it's been a pleasure. It's a lot of fun to hear about your journey from how you got your way into out of finance into a kitchen, and then ultimately like starting an awesome wine company. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Well, thanks for having me.